Welcome into another episode of the Hook 'em Hoops podcast brought to you guys by the Field of 68. My name is Jason Kinander, joined by my co-host Tommy Yarrish. Tommy, Texas took the fourth-ranked Houston Cougars down to the wire last night, ended up falling short in overtime, but there's a whole lot to take away from the game. The Longhorns now have lost their second game in a row, but there's a lot of good in this game as well. Let's hear some of your initial thoughts on the game against Houston.
Yeah, Jason, I think it's a positive showing for Texas. There's no moral victories around here. We've touched about that. We touched on that a lot this year, but you can definitely take some good things away from it. To be honest with you, Jason, I thought at halftime this game was completely over. I thought that Houston was just out physically, out. That's not even a word. They were just playing much more physical than Texas was. When you look at Texas's box score at the half, Jason, I'm gonna read you this, and you just try not to cringe as you listen to this. Brock Cunningham leads the team in scoring alongside Max Asmus with 5 points. From then, Dylan Mitchell, 4 points, Caden Shedrick, 4 points, IT Horton, 3 points, Dylan Asu, 2 points, Tyrese Hunter, 2 points. So nobody has more than, I think, 2 buckets on the entire team, and Max Asmus and Dylan Asu have combined for 7 points. That's just not a good sign. Like if Brock Cunningham is atop your box score as a leading scorer at the end of the first half against the number 4 team in the country and the number 1 Ken Palm team, you're not playing good at all. So to come out the way they did in the second half and play a lot more physical, I thought they were much better on defense. I think says a lot about, what this team is actually capable of and what Rodney Terry is capable of. As a coach, I know that Kelvin Sampson had a lot of praise for Coach Terry in the post-game press conference, and I think rightfully so. I think this was a good showing from Rodney Terry to show that he can hang with some of the best teams in the country, even with, some troubles on the roster. But I think, Jason, the two things, and I'm sure you'll touch on these too, that I think ended up hurting Texas the most, two moments from this game stuck out. The quick 9-0 run that Houston went on 3 straight possessions when Texas was up by 6, then all of a sudden they're down by 3, just like that. I think Jamal Shed had 2 threes. And then Tyrese Hunter doing what you tell all guards not to do, and that is jump with the ball in your hands looking to pass. He did that with 31 seconds left in the second half in a tie game. That's just a wasted possession where Texas could have gotten a shot up, and if that goes in, Houston, has less than 10 seconds to come the other way. I think Kelvin Sampson might have had one timeout left, but they still have, a limited amount of time to bring the ball up the floor and try to tie the game or win the game. So those two moments specifically stick out the most to me as to why Texas lost this game. But I mean, all around, just a really good game, and Houston is an absolute juggernaut.
Yeah, I think that Texas actually did a pretty good job in the second half and in overtime of answering some of the punches. Like you mentioned, when they were up 6 and then quickly let that lead slip away, I thought that Houston was going to end up running away with the game there. I thought Houston was going to end up running away with the game at halftime. And so this was Rodney Terry's best coached game of the year. Some of the adjustments that he made, specifically taking Tyrese Hunter off of Jamal Shed and putting Kendall Weaver on Shed towards the end of the second half. Had Terry done that earlier, maybe the game has a different outcome. Jamal Shed led all scores of 25 points last night. And, I think the Tyrese Hunter's defense at times this year has been lacking. He's somebody who is usually tasked with guarding the team's best opposing scorer, at least at the guard position. And more often than not in conference play, Tyrese Hunter has struggled when tasked with, taking on a big-time scoring guard, whether it be Joe Toussaint of Texas Tech, Jalen Sellers of UCF, and then now last night, Shed of Houston. But Texas did a good job of answering the punches. In that second half, the defense was incredibly strong from Texas. They wanted the game more than Houston. And for a Texas team that has been played, they haven't played a physical brand of basketball this year. They haven't responded well to adversity in the first half. In the second half, they never looked in rhythm in that BYU game on Saturday. But they almost ended up pulling this one out. And so even though Texas fell short on Monday night, they still rose one spot in the net rankings. They are now net 40, where 2.5 weeks ago they were outside of the top 60 in the net rankings. And so Texas, by all the metrics, is improving. I think that Rodney Terry and the coaching staff is getting there. I think that they know what they have and where they want to play what they have. And now it's just a matter of those players succeeding to the highest level in their roles.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think yesterday was a great game for the Kendall Weaver hive that we've kind of assembled. There's a lot of fans out there of Kendall Weaver. I mean, rightfully so. What you look at his performance last night, and Kelvin Sampson after the game in his post-game press conference said that Kendall Weaver was their best defensive guard. And he's not wrong. He's not even close to being wrong because you look at Kendall Weaver down the stretch, put it on Jamal Shed. Friend of the program, Fran Fraschilla, said on the broadcast that, you know, Jamal Shed was so hot that you just got to completely not let him touch the ball. And Kendall Weaver comes out and plays textbook deny defense to just completely shut him out of the game. And that's what ended up, I think, being a huge part of why Texas stuck around and why Houston didn't run away with it, because Shed was putting on a clinic. I mean, the shooting numbers might not reflect it, but when they needed a bucket, he was the guy they turned to, and more often than not, the shot was falling for Shed all night. So Kendall Weaver was fantastic defensively. And I think, Jason, I'm curious as to your, I think this was one of the better games that we've seen Dillon Mitchell play in a Texas uniform. He was huge, especially at the start of the second half, ends up having a really quality double-double with 16 points and 10 boards. And, when you look at this game too, I think the story of it is Texas is out-rebounded 47-36, and Houston scores 19 second chance points to Texas's 8. So, good rebounds numbers from Mitchell, but it just shows that you got to be more physical on the glass. There were a lot of wasted rebounds fairly that, Texas has 2, 3, even 4 guys in the paint. And someone like Joseph Tugler, who I thought had a fantastic game for Houston, comes in and just tips it out or finds a way to get his paws on it. I think one of the critiques that I had for Dylan DeSue last night was he was just too soft trying to rebound the ball. I think he didn't go up strong enough when he held on and let the ball slip away from him a couple of times. So um still some really quality performances from Weaver and Mitchell, I think. And then DeSue comes out and plays pretty well too. DeSue and Asmus combined for 27 in the second half after starting off with 7 points in the first half. So they responded really well, but it just shows that there's levels to it. And Texas just isn't at every level just yet.
Mhm. Yeah, I thought last night was Dillon Mitchell's best game as a Longhorn, and he continues to step up in some of the biggest stages. I think about last year's Gonzaga game at the Moody Center when Dillon Mitchell had 3 dunks, electrifying dunks on 4 possessions. This wasn't the same type of game where he was having explosive plays. He did have a few explosive plays, but he had a productive, efficient night on the glass, inside. He's starting to unlock his offensive package, which is exciting to watch. And you wonder if he stays another year or even 2, the type of player that he can become at Texas. Now, as for them getting out rebounded, I agree. It's a lack of physicality, and that's sort of what happens when your 2 big guys deal with injuries that are very less than ideal for big guys. You have Hayden Shedrick, who has been dealing with lingering back problems throughout the year, and Dylan DeSue, who was on the shelf for almost 9 months from a foot injury. And so those guys are playing gingerly, whether they want to admit it or not. And so you need the physical rebounding of Dillon Mitchell, of Kendall Weaver, and honestly of Brock Cunningham. And that was one of the issues last night was Brock Cunningham just wasn't giving Texas good minutes. And you need him on the court as one of your most physical, if not your absolute most physical defender. And he still did a fine job defensively. It's just he is sort of unplayable at times offensively. And when you have Shedrick and Cunningham and Weaver on the court at the same time, it's kind of difficult to make things happen offensively. And so those are 3 of Texas's best defenders, probably Texas's 3 most physical defenders, not counting Dillon Mitchell right there. And so the lineup issues are still being worked through by Rodney Terry. I thought this was a good night for Dylan DeSue. He had a hard time getting some of his shots going. The interior pressure from Houston's defense was incredible. Joseph Tugler had a great night. Javier Francis also had a good night. Juwan Roberts. It wasn't even the rebounding numbers for those guys. They did an excellent job of boxing out. There were countless times where the ball would just get, the Houston bigs would box out down low, and the rebound would get out to the top of the key or to the 3-point line to one of Houston's guards because Tugler and Francis were doing such a good job of boxing out, playing more physical than Texas's big guys. And so, that can't happen in a big game at home. Fran Fraschilla kept saying on air in the first half that Texas needs to want this one more, and they did in the second half, but it was too little too late. And they also got outplayed a little bit there in overtime. So, in conclusion, from my thoughts on the game, Texas surprised me. I thought that after what I saw in that BYU game, this was not going to be a good matchup for Texas. Defensively, the guard play was fine. Max Asmus did a great job on LJ Cryer. I think people need to start giving Asmus a little bit more credit defensively because he was expected to be a liability this year, and he's held his own at times. So he deserves a little bit of praise there. But overall, Texas played, some of the best basketball that they could have played. They shot 30% from three. They shot 70% from the line. You'd like to see them shoot a little bit better from the field, but you put up 72 points against Houston. You're going to win half the time, and this time they just didn't win against a team that just wanted it a little more, played a little bit more physical. And it's a good lesson learned because now we know that this Texas team can run with literally the top team in the conference.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Jason. I mean, this is a Houston team that I think is a bona fide national championship contender with their brand of basketball. Fran was saying on the broadcast that they just pump out big physical, rebounders down low, big guys down low who just play the game their way. And they do it so well that it's hard to stop really for any team. And Texas, not being as physical of a team in general, really, I think hurts them here. But maybe this is a lesson learned that, they have to be more physical. And if they can tap into that and play a little bit more like they did in the second half of that Houston game, then this could end up being a really good team with some really positive games down the stretch. The only thing is, they're trying to build a tournament resume. And when you look at it right now, they're 3-5 in quad one games. I think 1-1 and 2-3, and then undefeated in quad four. Jason, looking ahead, they've got 6 quad one games out of their last 10 coming up. 5 of those are on the road. I mean, it's just it's absolutely brutal. Like, you've still got Kansas, you're going to Baylor. I'm trying to think of the others right now, but you go
TCU
to
on
Houston,
Saturday.
you go to Houston again. Like, you have to, that's not the last time they play Houston. They have to see them again on their own home court. I mean, it is a really brutal stretch, and Texas is not out of the picture, I don't think, yet, but I don't know, man. It's not looking good. I don't think the Longhorns have played their best basketball on the road, and I don't know if they can play 5 really good games on the road to be able to pull out, I don't know how many you think they would need to win. Maybe I think we're sitting right around that 2-3 range right now. And if it's 2, I think it would have to be a convincing 2 because you still got 3 losses there. But um, I just like Texas, I'm kind of on the bubble right now on whether or not I think they're gonna be a tournament team or not. And I might be slipping to the other side where it says they're not going to be, Jason.
Tommy, people are going to panic if they take a look at the Big 12 conference standings. I mean, Texas is in sole possession of last place at 3-5. Yet the metrics still say that this is a tournament team. Texas is ranked 40 by the net ratings, and they're ranked, let's see, 35 by KenPom. And so, by those numbers, if the season were to end today, which we know it doesn't, but if the season were to end today, Texas would be one of the last teams in the field. And ESPN's Joe Lunardi, the world-renowned bracketologist, right now this morning has Texas as his 8th to last team in the field. So you mentioned those quad one games. They have 10 regular season games remaining. 6 are quad one games. If Texas splits those quad one games, even splits the regular season games, this team is in the tournament. For me, it's more about getting healthy, finding the lineups that work, and making sure that your veteran players, Asmus, Dessou, Weaver, and Hunter, are playing their best basketball down the stretch, because we've seen these past couple of years in March, if you have a team that's built for the moment with guys who have been there before, it doesn't matter what happened in January, February, even those first couple of weeks of March. Once you get into the big dance, as long as you're in, you have a chance to win. And so I can't call off this Texas team yet. There's still more to be seen, so much more basketball to be played. Last night was a step in the right direction, without a doubt.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm just saying, five away games in those quad one games. That's what stands out to me, right? I think that's just an absolutely brutal stretch. And we talked about how brutal this stretch was for Texas, playing six ranked teams in a row. You've got your TCU Horned Frogs up next. And that's going to be a really good game up in Fort Worth, I think. I know we'll touch on that here in a minute, but man, you're completely right in that last night was a step in the right direction for Texas, but there are a lot of steps left to be taken for this team, I think. And I think you do have to tip your cap to Rodney Terry, because a lot of people have been questioning whether or not he's the guy, which I think is ridiculous to do in year one in the Big 12 conference when he's won games against good teams and he's hung around with teams like you. I think it's just completely ludicrous that after what he's shown so far, people somehow think that another coach would somehow solve the problem in their first season. Like nobody next season could replace Rodney Terry and just completely like turn this team into a Final Four contender. No one's going to do that, Jason.
And you know what? They're not gonna be willing to rebuild the roster with the new staff and with the new head coach. Like, the whole point of recruiting a 3, maybe even 4-man class of 2024 is so that Texas can actually develop some guys and have some 3-4 year players. And I just don't think that, Rodney Terry would be one thing if this team was like a mile out of the tournament field, but they're just not. Like, they're playing high competition. They lost a couple of games that they shouldn't have lost. But I think right now they're probably playing the level of basketball that we expected. Like, did we expect that they were going to beat Houston before the season?
No, we
No.
didn't expect they were going to. I don't expect them to beat Houston the next time they play them. The fact that it was a 4-point game last night, the way that Texas got out rebounded and got outscored on second chance points. If I looked at those two numbers alone, I would have told you that Houston won this game by 15 points. Like that's how good Houston has been, and that's how much I think of how Texas matched up with Houston going into the game. Down 8.5, which very easily could have been 10 if not for a last second, 2 points there. You would have thought that the Cougars just kept rolling the way that Jamal Shed was playing, the way that they were playing physically on the interior. It just didn't seem plausible, but Texas comes out and they respond and they rolled with the punches the entire game. It is very hard in a game of runs that basketball is to hang around after every run. Houston went on several of them. Texas went on several of them, and both teams just kind of hung in there with each other, and it ended up being Houston who got the best in overtime, which you could tell, Jason, in overtime that everybody there was just absolutely floored. I mean, they were just exhausted. Like
Yeah.
I think you and I could have brought more energy to the court than those guys after that stretch. But and speaking of that kind of last stretch, Jason, I was curious for your thoughts as to this. We talked about lineups so far on the pod. I thought that the closing lineup that Rodney Terry had of Max Asmus, Tyrese Hunter, Kendall Weaver, Dylan Mitchell, and Dylan DeSue is a great 5. I'm not saying that should be a starting group. I think IT Horton still for now, he might be pushing it, but for now you keep him in there. But I really like that 5, Jason. And I think eventually, maybe if Horton continues to struggle, that could be your starting 5 for Texas.
Yeah, I think that could definitely be the starting 5. I like how Rodney Terry's playing his best lineup at the end of the game. I mean, I don't think that you necessarily have to play your best 5 as the starters, especially because this is a pretty shallow, thin Texas team. You need someone to score off the bench. Like, Kendall Weaver's been putting up good numbers off the bench. That's a boost for Texas, and I think that they like what they're seeing from him as the 6th man. I would, look at him as the favorite to be starting at point guard next year alongside Trey Johnson, the 4th, 5th rated recruit in the country. But I like what RT did with the lineups. The adjustments, especially, he kind of had to play Shedrick out of necessity down the stretch with DeSue playing with 4 fouls, but it worked out well. Shedrick played good defense. And even though he generally got outbodied on the glass last night, he was making an impact, and he generated stops for Texas in the last 2 minutes of regulation. Like, that was huge. That was really, really big. And so if Rodney Terry is going to be able to do that, where he kind of interchanges guys for, a couple of minutes, makes these constant substitutions, maybe that is the move for Texas instead of, these platoon type lineups where one to two guys on the court at all times can't really shoot the ball. It's just, against a team like Houston where only one guy, if at all, is going to be open in your 32nd possession, you want all five guys to be able to score it. I think that's what that lineup presents to you, with the exception of Dylan Mitchell. But Dylan was just making too big of an impact on the glass on both sides to have taken him out of the game. So with that said, we'll pivot a little bit, touch briefly upon this Texas-TCU game. Tommy, I'm very excited for this one. Battle between Texas and the 25th ranked Horned Frogs at Schollmeyer Arena in Fort Worth at 1 p.m. on Saturday. And so this should be a good test for Texas against the most veteran team in the conference. This is a TCU team that has made literally all of transfers, most of which are fourth, fifth, even sixth-year guys. And this is also a TCU team that is very deep. They find different outlets of scoring every single night. Sometimes it's Emmanuel Miller. Last week in the 3 overtime game against Baylor, it was Jameer Nelson Jr. Other times it's been Travion Tennyson. Tommy, Texas is going to need to replicate last night's defensive performance against Houston if they're going to want to stick in this game, because TCU just has too many scoring options, and Texas doesn't have enough scoring options. They're going to need Asmus and Dessou to have characteristic games in order to run with TCU, and then they're going to need that third push from either Weaver, Mitchell, or Hunter in order to put themselves over the bump against TCU, because this is a very talented Horned Frogs squad, Tommy. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts in this game.
Yeah, it should be a really good Kinander Bowl, Jason. I think the TCU, I've been right with you there the whole season that I like this TCU team a lot. I think they hammered the transfer portal very well. Emmanuel Miller obviously stands out the most, but I really like what Jameer Nelson Jr. has done for them on defense, averaging 2.4 steals a night. One of the better guards, I would say, that isn't talked about in the Big 12 conference. It doesn't give you as much scoring prowess as a guy like Max Asmus, I would say, but like you mentioned, when they need him to kind of on that rotating door, revolving door of scorers for TCU, he has stepped up. That game against Baylor was big for him. And then Micah Peavy too is a guy that I've really liked since his days at Duncanville. High school, and he gives you 11 a night, 5 rebounds, 2.8 assists, and 1.3 steals. That's the thing, Jason. The top 3 scorers for TCU all averaging at least a steal a game. I think that's very important. And, Texas has done a fairly good job, I would say, as of late, preventing the turnovers. That was kind of an early season problem that the Longhorns were having, and they've toned back on that a little bit. Only 10 last night against Houston. So going to have to limit that and play another fairly sound game of basketball in the turnover perspective if they want to hang around with TCU, who can really light it up. The 3-point percentages for TCU, guys like Jameer Nelson and Peavy, both under 25%. So not as great, but you still have guys like Miller who are knocking on the door of 40%, and Travion Thompson, who you talked about a little, Tennyson, excuse me, 46% from the arc. So we talked about how that is a weakness for the Longhorns, and we saw how many open looks Houston got last night for 3 that they weren't able to connect on, which that's a whole different conversation if LJ Cryer found his shot last night. But yeah, like you mentioned, dude, should be a really good game, and it doesn't get easier for Texas. It doesn't get easier. They have a long break until Saturday, but it does not get any easier. So TCU is going to get a rested Texas team, but still should be a lot of fun.
My last note for now on that TCU game, I think that Texas will appreciate the familiarity of playing against a known conference opponent. They've struggled against the new Big 12 teams this year. They lost to BYU, UCF, and Houston now, and they took Cincinnati down to the buzzer. And so Texas will appreciate playing a team that they played last year with some players who they're used to game planning for. And with that said, this is a Texas team that has won 9 of the last 11 matchups against TCU. And the 2 matchups that they didn't win were decided by a total of 7 points. And so Texas has dominated the recent history in this series. So even though it's a good TCU team, the metrics favor them. They're top 30 in net, top 25 in KenPom. Texas can get this one on the road, because I think that they're getting their guys who were supposed to contribute this year are playing their best basketball. Max Asmus is becoming a given 20 points per night, which is important for Texas. He is playing firmly at an all Big 12 level. Dylan Dessou seems fully healthy. He's nearly a double per night, as is Dylan Mitchell. And so if Texas can get those performances night in and night out, you're going to beat a team like TCU eventually, because TCU, as good as they are, they play up to their highest levels of competition, but they've also lost some games that they shouldn't lose this year. And I think that this is a game that can be filed into that category. And so that's really all I have on this game for now. I'm curious if you have any last thoughts on that matchup against the Horned Frogs, or any other general Big 12 things that you want to talk about before we get out of here.
Well, I think if we're going to do, predictions like we usually do, this is actually a game where I see Texas winning. And I would keep it right around that 5-7 range for the Longhorns, just because I think the time that they have between now and Saturday is really big to just kind of, it's not necessarily enough time to get healthy, fully healthy, I would say, but we saw Caden Shedrick get banged up last night. Those guys are out there for an overtime game against one of the most physical teams in the country, if not the most physical team in the country, in Houston. So having some time to, watch the film, recover, relax a little bit before you head to Fort Worth on Saturday is really big for Texas. And I think TCU, they take on Texas Tech tonight at home. That's another really physical team, and that's going to be a tough challenge for the Horned Frogs. Grant McCaslin's got the Red Raiders rolling, so that's not an easy game. And like you mentioned, Jason, the recent success with TCU for Texas, I think, is really big in this. And I think Texas responds and bounces back with a big win on the road in Fort Worth on Saturday.
I second that. I've got Texas in this one too. I think that given the recent history between these two teams, Texas is going to feel good coming into Fort Worth. And this is a good matchup for Texas, even though TCU has many different outlets to score the ball. Their guard play isn't necessarily dynamic. And I don't foresee Texas's guards, Asmus, Hunter, Weaver, struggling defensively with these TCU guards. I think that they'll be able to keep them contained and really keep the game played in the paint. And if that's how this game's going to be played, Texas has a major advantage, especially if Dessou and Shedrick are able to stay on the court. So I'm going to make it 2 for 2, and I'm going to predict that Texas will go into Fort Worth and get a good get-back win against a ranked TCU Horned Frogs squad. That'll do it for us today on the Hook'em Hoops podcast. Thanks as always for joining us. Tommy, we'll be back pretty soon to wrap up this Texas and TCU game after the weekend. But until then, stay warm or stay cool. It's been beautiful in Austin. I'm so
It's
used
so
to
hot
saying
out here, man.
it's
Yeah,
cold out.
we
Yeah,
went through
wear
that
short
1 week of
sleeves.
freezing, and now we're good.
Yeah, I mean, hell, I wore jorts to class yesterday, so I can't complain about anything. But always great to talk to you. Always great to talk a little Texas basketball to our viewers at home. Have a good one. We'll be back with you soon.